Hello and welcome to this video of Seamus Heaney's blackberry picking. And as you can see in the background, we're slowly watching blackberries decompose, slowly shriveling, covered with almost dark, horrible fungus. This is a revision guide to Seamus Heaney's blackberry picking, part of the GCSE poetry anthology. We're going to look at the meaning of the poem, its language and structural choices and the effects that are created through them, and the context, that's when and by who the poem was written. Let's start off then by hearing a little more about Seamus Heaney, our poet of today.
Heaney was born in 1939 into a Catholic family in Northern Ireland and grew up on a farm in County Derry. He's now moved to the south and lives with his family in Dublin. Seamus Heaney, those early beginnings, what sort of farm was it?
Well, it's what they call a small farm, but of course, one man's small farm is another man's estate. This was actually about 50 acres. I say it was, the land is still the same, but things have changed on the land. I mean, when I was growing up in the 40s, you could still see people ploughing with horses, you could still see people mowing with scythes, you could still see people using forks to build hay. And the rhythm of life was really a medieval rhythm almost, you know. Well, in the 50s, with mechanization and so on, that all changed. And now the same land, the same ground, but there are milking parlours and tractors and mechanizations, and the rhythms have changed considerably.
But all those old rhythms and the, I mean, for example, there are that you've got poems about Thatchers, blacksmiths,
yeah, right,
of the forges,
yeah,
and all those things. They are from your very early days.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when I began to write, for some reason or other, it was that first deposit of experience that was almost hermetically sealed. It sealed down, came up, and it was like reaching into another world, even though it was a world that I had experienced, say, 15, 20 years before.
Now, your father keeps coming back in these. I mean, images of your father at work, and indeed sometimes of your grandfather as well, and potatoes, digging, and things like that.
Well, I think that is part of my generation's experience in this way, that I was part of the 1947 Education Act transition from land to school, as it were, from the earth of labour to the heaven of education.
Seamus Heaney was born and raised in County Derry, Northern Ireland, on a small farm. Blackberry picking draws directly from these rural experiences. The poem is based on his childhood memories of picking blackberries each summer with his siblings. Heaney is known for his rich tactile imagery and attention to the physical world. In blackberry picking, his characteristic use of sensual body language, such as flesh was sweet and palms as sticky as bluebeards, reflects both pleasure and messiness of life. A major theme in Heaney's work is the tension between idealism and reality. In blackberry picking, the children's excitement and hope are undercut by inevitable decay, as we saw from our opening video. Now let's see and hear Seamus Heaney's blackberry picking.
Blackberry picking. Late August, given heavy rain and sun for a full week, the blackberries would ripen. At first, just one, a glossy purple clot, among others red, green, hard as a knot. You ate that first one, and its flesh was sweet like thickened wine. Summer's blood was in it, leaving stains upon the tongue and lust for picking. Then red ones inked up, and that hunger sent us out with milk cans, pea tins, jam pots, where briars scratched and wet grass bleached our boots. Round hay fields, cornfields, and potato drills, we trekked and picked until the cans were full, until the tinkling bottom had been covered with green ones, and on top, big dark blobs burned like a plate of eyes. Our hands were peppered with thorn pricks, our palms sticky as bluebeards. We hoarded the fresh berries in the byre, but when the bath was filled, we found a fur, a rat-grey fungus, glutting on our cash. The juice was stinking too. Once off the bush, the fruit fermented, the sweet flesh would turn sour. I always felt like crying. It wasn't fair that all the lovely canfuls smelt of rot. Each year I hoped they'd keep, knew they would not.
Blackberry Picking then, by Seamus Heaney. His family going out picking blackberries and then realising once they got home that already these lovely juicy fruit had already begun to decay. Now we're going to look at the start, the middle and end of the poem and comment on some structure and language devices that he uses deliberately to create effects for the reader. The parts in red are the structural choices and the parts in pink are the language choices. The lines often run on without a terminal punctuation, that is a comma or full stop at the end of the sentence. Lines 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 are good examples of that. This creates a naturalistic flowing rhythm that mimics the gathering excitement and movement of the children as they pick berries. The poem is written in iambic pentameter, although it's not strictly formal. The rhythm reflects natural speech, making the poem feel conversational and reflective. The simile, sweet, like thickened wine, compares blackberry juice to rich wine, suggesting both pleasure and a hint of decay and fermentation. Vivid sensory imagery dominates the opening lines. Phrases like glossy purple clot, thickened wine and summer's blood evoke rich visual and tactile experiences. The use of taste and touch, sweet and stains upon the tongue, draw readers' attention to the physicality of blackberry picking. Words like lust, hunger, clot, blood bring in a darker, almost sensual or visceral undertone. This elevates the simple act of blackberry picking to something more primal and intense. The shift from the innocent sweet to a lustful picking introduces the theme of desire and its consequences to the poem. The middle passage marks the climax of the children's harvest. Their joyful and obsessive effort has reached its peak. Heaney's language brims with sensory richness. Sights, sounds, and touch, also turned increasingly dark and symbolic. The phrase potato drills refers to ridges or furrows in the field, grounding the setting in Irish agricultural practice. These fields evoke a sense of childhood, freedom, and sense of seasonal plenty, adding to the joy and intensity of blackberry picking. The blend of pastoral imagery and moral and symbolic weight is part of what makes blackberry picking such a powerful meditation on childhood, experience, and the bittersweet nature of growing up. Tinkling is almost delicate, an almost musical sound, suggesting metal containers and the joy of their gradual filling. The fact that the bottom needed to be covered emphasises how thorough the children were. They weren't satisfied until no gaps remained. There's a tactile auditory detail here that makes the memory vivid and sensory rich. The big, dark blobs contrast starkly with the green ones, symbolising full ripeness. Burned is a powerful verb, suggesting intensity of colour, almost too vivid, too ripe. It introduces a slightly sinister tone, hinting that this perfection is already tipping into decay. The like a plate of eyes simile is striking and unsettling. The ripe berries are likened to eyes, evolving a sense of being watched or of unease. This image marks a tonal shift. It's no longer just the sweetness and delight of childhood. There's an eerie or grotesque undertone. It could suggest guilt, conscience, or simply growing awareness of mortality and corruption, key themes in Heaney's work. And now we move to the end of the poem. The poem moves from a long 16-line first stanza to a much shorter second stanza. The structural shift mirrors the emotional turn of the poem, from abundant overflowing desire to sudden compact disillusionment. The turn happens exactly at the stanza break. The first stanza is exuberant, sensual, full of action, while the second delivers the consequences. The word fermented has a double meaning. Literally rotting but also hints at natural process of change, possibly suggesting a loss of innocence. Sweet versus sour is a stark sensory contrast, underscoring the emotional shift and joy to bitterness. Rotten and stinking are harsh, ugly words, emphasising decay. The assonance of juice and stinking slows the rhythm, making the rot feel heavy and inescapable. There's a sudden loss of beauty here, a collapse of romantic vision. The tone becomes intimate and childlike, a moment of raw emotional honesty. Always just as a reoccurring pain linked to growing awareness of disappointment and impermanence. And lastly, the last line echoes the idea of a recurring cycle, suggesting this wasn't a one-time experience, but a central repeated disappointment. This repetition adds to a universal, almost ritualistic quality to the poem's lesson about impermanence. We've now reached the end of our notes, and now let's summarise. Blackberry Picking by Seamus Heaney. Who is the poem about? Blackberry Picking is about the speaker's childhood experience of picking blackberries, capturing the excitement and disappointment that come with growing up. It reflects universal themes of desire, loss, and bittersweet nature of memory. What is the poem about? Blackberry picking is about the excitement and greed of children harvesting ripe blackberries, followed by the inevitable disappointment that fruit spoils. The poem explores themes of desire, loss, and fleeting nature of pleasure. Why did Heaney write the poem? The poem Blackberry Picking was written to capture the intense emotions of childhood, joy, desire, and disappointment. Through the simple act of picking blackberries, it explores how early experiences teach us about the inevitable cycle of hope and loss in life. Now we're going to look at particular quotes from the poem, 3 of them to be exact. The poems are, each quote, is linked to 3 different comments you can make about it, giving you a range of things to say about each one. This then is quote number 1, and its analysis next to it. Then we move to quote number 2, and just in case before thinking about what Bluebeard is actually a reference to, here is a short video explaining.
Bluebeard by Charles Perrault is a fairy tale about a wealthy but violent man named Bluebeard who has been married multiple times, with each wife mysteriously disappearing. Bluebeard gives his new wife the keys to his castle, forbidding her to enter one particular room. Driven by curiosity, she unlocks the room and discovers the murdered bodies of Bluebeard's previous wives. Bluebeard returns and threatens to kill her, but she is saved at the last moment by her brothers, who kill Bluebeard. The story ends with the new wife inheriting his fortune and living happily ever after. If you want to hear the full original story, then please...
And there you heard then a little bit about Bluebeard and why these blackberries were linked to him through the line sticky as Bluebeard's. And now we move to quote number 3. And the comments on it. Now we've got our complete collection of notes, we need to look at how you might write those in an actual essay. Remember that an essay would be graded for the following: commenting on language and structure, comment on the poet's meaning, and commenting on the poem's context. This and more detail was said at the beginning of this video. First of all, let's look at a typical essay question based on this poem. How is the theme of nature explored in Blackberry Picking? This is a grade 3 response. As you read it through, you can see the paragraphs quite short. The ideas are not very well explained. There's very little link to the word because here, or the connective because here. And the quotes and their explanations are all quite simplistic, short, and quite basic. There are, however, at least 2 to 3 quotes here. The meaning of the poem is clearly said. You've got one or two pieces of technical language, like the word simile, and there is an overview of the poem, that is overall what the poem is actually about. Let's upgrade that slightly. Let's now have a look at a grade 5 response. In Blackberry Picking, Seamus Heaney explores the theme of nature by showing how it brings both pleasure and disappointment. The next paragraph begins with the phrase "at first," suggesting a structure choice of the poem, how it begins before it ends. You've got quotes now being linked together and slightly better explained. You've got the magic 3 there, berries are rich, juicy and tempting, suggesting this pupil or this candidate knew a bit more about why these quotes are being chosen. They go on to explain that there are different sides to this poem, using again a range of quotes. It's still a bit limited in the way it explains it, but it is a bit more detailed than the first one. You can see the third paragraph there indicates the change in the poem, how the structure of the poem deliberately forces a different effect on the reader. Once again, it ends with a kind of summary of the poem. Now let's move to our grade 7 response. The language choices here are much more exact to the poem itself, much less generic than the grade 3 version. It does use a range of quotes, as you can see, about 4 to 6 being used here. And the language choices, i.e. the technical language like metaphor, are a little bit higher level than our grade 5 example. This also begins to explain ideas in a bit more detail, using much more specific or sophisticated subject terminology, such as the word impermanence, that you actually heard in some of the notes early on. The context is also given much more strength. Contextually, Heaney draws upon his rural Irish upbringing, linking then to Heaney's aspirations or ideas behind writing the poem. None of these answers are, of course, full responses, but they give you an idea of roughly what the answer for a grade 3, 5 and 7 might look and sound like as you write it down. Now, each one of these paragraphs could do with a bit of extra detail, as I would expect from a GCSE candidate. There might well be more quotes. There might be more zooming in on ideas or analysis into those quotes. And I think the notes you've had during this video, you should find help you do that. But these responses, these short responses, at least give you a flavour of what a grade 3, 5 and 7 might look like. Thank you very much then for listening to this audio or visual guide to Seamus Heaney's Blackberry Picking. I will see you for the next one.